Year-old Sarah Blair easily wins election to the West Virginia House of Delegates. She's now the youngest delegate in West Virginia history and currently the youngest lawmaker in America. Another couple of interesting notes, James, that were running down the selection updates. Cocaine was found on a ship owned by he's now the majority leader, Mitch McConnell's father-in-law. No one's talked about that. And an interesting bit from our man Brock West, 1.8 million voters are dead, and other facts you didn't know about vote fraud. James?
Well, some interesting stories there, so I hope people will go through the show notes and check them out. But, I mean, do I really have to go through my take on elections in general? I'm sure people will know by now, but of course there's always new people tuning in. So yes, it is fork versus spoon, red versus blue, left versus right. It is a mostly meaningless charade in a lot of different ways. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not exactly excited about this. I don't really care either way. It's just a different face of the same ruling party. So off with one hat, on with the other. Don't blame me. I voted for Kodos. Well, having said that, though, I mean, things like the ballot initiatives can be important, including, of course, this 92. Now, was that legalization of marijuana or decriminalization?
91 is actually the decriminalization and legalization of marijuana. It's the legalization of recreational marijuana. So Washington and Colorado did it first. Now Oregon's the third and D.C. is the fourth.
Well, there you go. Steps in the right direction for personal liberty. And as you say, the industrial hemp angle on this, exceptionally important because, of course, this is one of the reasons that marijuana has been outlawed for so long, because it does cut into a lot of industrial activities that otherwise get a boon because hemp is outlawed. So that is important. We will keep our eye on that, obviously. And congratulations to the people of Oregon joining the hippie states. All right, but on that note, I got an interesting email in from a listener, Steve, who notes that in Florida, you have a couple of interesting stories. For example, one from the Orlando Weekly. Las Vegas casino owner Sheldon Adelson is bankrolling Florida campaign against medical marijuana, which is interesting to contrast with the New York Daily News article from last year. Sheldon Adelson Sands Casino to pay $47 million fine for failing to report deposits from alleged drug trafficker. So we have a drug money launderer helping to bankroll the measure against medical marijuana in Florida. I wonder why. Is it because that represents the big cut into the profits of the people who stand to benefit from the outlawing, the criminalization of the use of these chemicals and drugs? Yes, of course. So this is good. Again, it's a step in the right direction and helps to break the monopoly. Of course, now we have to work towards decriminalization of other drugs, not for the purpose of spreading them or hoping that people will get addicted to them, but so that we can treat people who are addicted to them as addicts rather than convicts, and stop putting our money in the hands of the Cocaine Importation Agency, the CIA, which has monopolized the running of drugs into the country. So again, this is a step in the right direction, but overall, Republicrats, Democrats, who gives a flying something or other? I certainly don't.
Bush, Clinton, 2016, woohoo!
Yeah.
James, let's look internationally for our second story this week as Israeli ministers pass bill jailing stone throwers for 20 years. We grabbed this from RT. Government ministers in Israel have voted to increase penalties tenfold on people convicted of throwing stones at vehicles from 2 to 20 years. This is a move designed to deal with a wave of violence that's hit some of Jerusalem's Arab districts. If Israeli courts can prove that someone threw a stone with the intent of causing serious bodily harm, they get to impose this new 20-year sentence. The law would also allow the conviction of people who hurl rocks at police cars or police officers with the aim of hindering them from carrying out their duty. If intent to cause harm can't be proven, then the amendments still allow for 10-year sentence, a hefty 10-year sentence, if the safety of a person or a vehicle is endangered. At the moment, such crimes have a maximum penalty of 2 years. A new policy that's been in place since July and applies to minors as well as adults means that Palestinians are being held in custody from the time they are arrested until the end of proceedings. That kind of sounds like indefinite detention to me. There are also minor clashes in the West Bank after last Friday's prayers. However, the West Bank would not be subject to this new legislation, as it's effectively ruled by the Israeli military. James, there are other bits to throw back in this, and actually a fascinating investigation from Al Jazeera. But I'll close out the segment with that because I want to throw this back to you as we're basically kind of talking about Israeli terror versus Palestinian terror.
Well, that's exactly the point. And again, you look at this 20 years for throwing stones at police officers in Jerusalem, but contrast that with a recent report that just came out, was covered by The Independent, saying that the airstrikes on Gaza could be war crimes. Gee, do you think 1,523 civilians, 2,192 Palestinians overall dead in that reign of terror that we saw earlier this summer, and there could have been war crimes in there? Do you think? The targeting of civilians and civilian populations, that was, again, I mean, it just goes to show the contrast between the two sides here, and it's a bit like saying, well, that man came after me with a fluffy pillow, I better shoot him between the eyes. So, and again, the double standards continue because, of course, the Zionist side of this always considers Israeli life to be worth more than Palestinian life, period, end of story. And this is seen time and time and time and time and time again, but some recent examples of that phenomenon. There's a Reddit's conspiracy subreddit post about world news on Reddit. The World News subreddit removed a submission about 11-year-old disabled Palestinian being blindfolded and detained by the IDF in Palestine because they don't allow local crime stories. Yeah, and, well, of course, that's not really news. But contrast that to something like the BBC covering breathlessly this new Jerusalem attack of a Palestinian targeting an Israeli by running him over with a white van, and this is the newest wave of terror, which they happen to note halfway down the story is due to the fact that the Israelis are cracking down once again on access to the Al-Aqsa mosque compound and increasing settlement expansion, which is why Jordan is now pulling their ambassador from Tel Aviv. And contrast that, for example, with a story that just happened a couple of weeks ago that you can find on the Middle East Monitor, but you will never see on BBC News. Jewish settler runs over 2 Palestinian children in the West Bank, killing 1. So again, if a Jewish a settler does it to a Palestinian child, who cares? If an Israeli gets killed by a Palestinian, though, major international story must be covered by the BBC. Unfortunately, these double standards continue. And on the note of Israeli terror, that brings up the related story that you were going to talk about from the Al Jazeera report.
Al Jazeera investigation: Israel knowingly attacked U.S. military ship in 1967. James, a lot of folks out there are probably, or they're not, should be familiar with the story of the USS Liberty. For folks of us who have been involved in alternative media, this is one of the sort of the bedrock stories that sort of exposes a lot of the official story of this entire sort of world and shell game that we're told about. What's fascinating about this, they have a new documentary called The Day Israel Attacked America. It is up on YouTube. I don't know if it'll stay there forever, so grab that link and grab the video down. 2 parts make this interesting, James. They have 2 exclusive bits. They've got new audio tapes from Israeli jets proving Israel identified the USS Liberty as an American ship before they attacked it. And the second one, it's the first revelation of a network of pro-Israel agents inside LBJ's administration, identified in declassified Israeli documents by their code names, who fed secret info back to Jerusalem and worked to sway LBJ to cover up the attack on the Liberty. And that would be another mission accomplished. James?
Unfortunately so. Again, this is not surprising. I think we all knew all of this already, but it's good to have the confirmation and the declassified documents and the actual audio of the tapes so that we can finally lay this to rest. Yes, that was an Israeli terror attack on the United States that was covered up by agents within the LBJ administration. Case closed. Another case of Israel terror being covered up by America.
Now, for our third and final story this week, James, let's turn to an op-ed piece, I suppose if we could call it that, originally published in the Financial Times, ft.com, which has a pretty hefty paywall. And again, I would always implore folks out there, save articles, screen grab, do what you got to do, because you never know when things are going to be removed. Is the new GCHQ boss afraid of the World Wide Web? His name's Robert Hannigan, and the op-ed he wrote, James, is called "The Web is a Terrorist Command and Control Network of Choice." In a lot of ways, shining more light than perhaps they mean to. But he writes, "The Islamic State of Iraq And the Levant, ISIS, is the first terrorist group whose members have grown up on the internet. They're exploiting the power of the web to create a jihadi threat with near global reach. The challenge to governments and their intel agencies is huge, and it can only be met with greater cooperation from technology companies. Terrorists have long made use of the internet, but ISIS's approach is different in two important areas. Where al-Qaeda and its affiliates saw the internet as a place to disseminate material anonymously or meet in dark spaces, ISIS has embraced the web as a noisy channel in which to promote itself, intimidate people, and radicalize new recruits. To those of us who have to tackle the depressing end of human behavior on the internet, it